This oral history of museum computing is provided by Seb Chan and was recorded on the 4th of March 2021 by Paul Marty and Kathy Jones. Story.
Okay, well, I guess, I didn't really ever intend to work in either IT or museums, really, and I kind of fell into both. Although I'd obviously been doing IT stuff for a long time previously, just in other parts of my life, I guess. I actually trained as a social worker and a social researcher, and also did a lot of music stuff, and still do a lot of music stuff. But I ended up in a job as I was doing my PhD kind of D at the University of New South Wales. Never finished that, but one of the jobs I was doing there, I ended up in IT support for the library there. And I think working within the library at that time, this is in 1999, I ended up, I think I started there actually maybe a year or so before that. But anyway, in 1999, Y2K is coming around and all of the rest. And so I was working on the university's Y2K project. And then a job came up at the Powerhouse Museum. And someone said, "Oh, why didn't you apply for that?" And I got that job because their Y2K consultant had to be walked off the premises, and they needed to hire someone really fast. So I started at the Powerhouse in May 1999. And a couple of years later, I was talking to the IT manager, Mitra Bar. She was really amazing and really awesome. And Mitra was saying, Seb, you were like the third or fourth person on our list. You were not the top person we wanted to hire. No one else wanted it, who was, and I was like, oh, great, thanks. But, I'd done a bunch of stuff since then there. So I felt okay about that. But it was interesting. So I ended up by luck in the IT department at the Powerhouse as the IT project manager responsible for their Y2K project. And of course, Y2K ends up sort of fizzling out, but that's probably, although you could never really know for sure, because of the good work that was done and sort of audits that were done. And I guess, around that time, I was also doing a lot of writing for video game magazines, doing reviews, and for the various computing magazines around Australia. I was a columnist and stuff, talking about stuff. Tim Hart was the director of knowledge and information management there at the time. And Tim was Mitra's boss. So the IT manager reported to Tim, and Tim and Sarah Canavadine were doing this big Olympic Games thing, because Sydney hosted the Olympics in 2000. And when the Y2K project stuff was done, Tim realized I was doing all this stuff with 3D graphics cards, because video games at the time you needed to buy these expensive separate graphics cards for them. You still do now. It's bizarre that it's come back to this. But anyway, so I was writing things for various magazines of how to build a gaming rig and all this sort of stuff, and reviewing games and doing stuff with 3D graphics cards in a sort of hobbyist, enthusiast, specialist way. And Tim was like, "Hey, you should come and work on this, because we're really struggling with getting the output of the 3D virtual Olympia we're building to work properly. You know stuff about video games. Come and work on this. It'll be fun. And I know that you do all this other creative stuff and going around doing the IT system administrator things. Maybe you want to do this as well." And I'm like, "Yeah, totally, sure." Because fixing people's network problems and rolling out the new batch of leased computers and stuff was, a little, it was fine, but it wasn't that exciting. And Mitra, I think also knew I was doing a lot of stuff with the web too. So anyway, I worked on that with Sarah and Tim, and then I went to ACM1 with Sarah as her sort of roadie, I guess, as she was doing a big presentation there on the big virtual heritage piece that she'd built. So it's this big 3D model of Olympia, which had involved going to Olympia and scanning the site. She was working with a photographer back then who was using who was making 3D stitched panoramas, spherical panoramas, and using these sort of Photoshop widgets to, do that by hand, which we now do in our phones. And it's like, oh my God, we used to do that by hand, and it used to take these people weeks. It was like, oh, this is crazy. And then you had to use this sort of Java plugin to make it work in the browser. So, I go to AECM1 with Sarah, then Tim ended up getting a job at Melbourne Museum and moving to Melbourne. And Sarah moved from the Powerhouse with him to Melbourne a couple of months later. Anyway, so then Kevin Assumption became Director of Knowledge and Information Management. I think this was probably about 2003 then. And so, or maybe 2002. Anyway, between Tim and Kevin, there was this money that had come up in state government for new digital projects. These things occasionally occurred down here. The Powerhouse had this music lab, this electronic music lab that was teaching kids how to use MIDI and stuff. And so I ended up helping the music lab, which was called the Sound House, moved from MIDI to computers. So whole computer rigs with sampling and all sorts of other stuff. And then this is all a bit out of sequence. But anyway, so then we applied for these grants, both to do a virtual Powerhouse and to do this music social network thing. So we got the money, built them in 2003-04. So there was virtual Powerhouse, and then there was this thing called Soundbite, which was basically an educational social network for the creation and sharing of electronic music that was made in the museum and by schools and stuff. This is all pre most of the other things that were going on, but post Napster, of course. So it was kind of interesting. Those sites completely failed for various reasons. They were built in Flash, but also they were just ahead of their time in many ways. And I think one of the interesting things around that project, both those projects, were that the virtual Powerhouse project started off this notion of how do you work with collections at scale. So that started to ask me and some of the other colleagues I was working with to create ways of connecting the collection management system directly to the web and public interfaces. Something which at the Powerhouse hadn't been done before. And the Soundbite project helped us commission from one of my friends who was an electronic musician and also programmer, a networked sequencer. So this is a decade before those things became even sort of thought about in other places, I think. This sort of notion where you could build a piece of software that you would download from the museum site. So it was called DACE, and it was like networked gaming, but for music creation. So it was peer-to-peer music sequencing. So it was kind of amazing thing, but of course the museum had no idea how to promote it or all those things. So it kind of withered on the vine. But it was a good, again, notion of how the museum might work with other creative people to bring some of those ideas into the world and to distribute them. Anyway, both those sites died. There's little shriveled shells of them on the Internet Archive because they're in Flash. They weren't captured properly. The archival memory of that is actually pretty low, but there were some pretty cool things in that stuff. And I think, Soundbite in many ways was the better of the two projects. But virtual museum informed a lot of the future work that would happen, mostly because it was a really heavy duty way of, choosing 200 things from the Powerhouse collection as representative of the whole collection. And then the work that went into doing that, we quickly realized you need to make a lot more than that available. And it was through the failure of that project that it gave us the sort of impetus to have to think about, well, could we make everything available? And then, of course, over the next couple of years, by 2006, we'd also done some projects like electronic Swatch book, which was at very early use of social tagging. So this is probably around the same time as Steve was spinning up. By that time, I was manager of what was called web services then. So Mitra Bar, the IT manager, moved to the education department, and her last decree in the organization was to move me out of the IT team and create a new unit, which was sort of digital and web, which was interesting and really quite important. And she said to Kevin, you know, I'm doing this because I don't think we want Seb's stuff to be stuck in the IT team, which was very good. And it was an acknowledgement that there was a space that wasn't IT. There was a space that wasn't. There was a different department that did the interactive experiences on the floor at the powerhouse. And, you know, out of that, we sort of ended up in this situation where there was this sort of weird competition between the interactive department, which was very science-centery model, built a lot of stuff in Director and stuff, made physical and mechanical stuff, and this sort of new emergent digital, but not that sort of interactive stuff in the web. So then at the powerhouse, so we had the interactives team that reported into the exhibitions group, the IT team that reported into the operations group, I guess, and then this sort of web group that was my group that reported to whatever the knowledge management deputy was, and that was separate but connected to curatorial more than it was to exhibitions, which was interesting. Anyway, that sort of institutional positioning piece I think was really valuable because it also wasn't with marketing. So it had this sort of different space to grow and different way to explore different ideas. So anyway, so then Electronic Swatch book comes about, and that really came out of, you know, speaking with the curators, and the curator of fashion and textiles, Glynis Jones, was showing us, you know, these swatch books, these books in their collection that had fabric swatches in them, and she was trying to figure out how to reduce the pressure on those, because all these students from the fashion courses near us would come in and request access to them. And of course, they're super fragile. And we were like, well, why don't we just digitize them and then give away images of the swatches, because they're looking for patterns. They're looking to be inspired. And of course, those books were not catalogued even by page. They were catalogued as a book. So you got, you know, 75/12 out of the shelf, and it had 5,000 swatches in it. And what we needed was a way of someone finding a particular pattern. So we were looking at Etsy, Give, kind of Pavana, who was then working with me as a programmer. He then subsequently left Powerhouse, went to the V&A, then went to California, ran a bunch of startups. I think is still in the startup scene in California. But anyway, Give was looking at Etsy one morning. I was like, Seb, we should do this thing where, you know, people can tag those patterns just by what they reckon they're called. We're like, we should do that. And then he was like, and we should do this search by color thing too. So I was like, yeah, we totally should, because then we just this browse by color. So he spun up very, very quickly a very, very simple method of sampling, breaking the square images into a grid of 16 squares, and then sampling the most prominent color from each of them, and then creating an average of that, which was kind of, or creating a sort of extra metadata. So all of these individual photos had this additional metadata. So the color metadata that was programmatically generated, or very, I didn't even want to call it computer vision. It really wasn't. It was very simple but effective. So made a little tool that did that, and then we were using the social tagging of the users to allow people to search by like plaid or gingham and things like that. And that happened before we put the Powerhouse collection on the web, but was really quite useful as a way of sort of gauging how building an institutional tolerance for folksonomies with the curators directly. So that was popular. This was also around the time Flickr was spinning up. Yeah. And so George Oates was speaking at Web Directions, which is a big web conference in Sydney. I had spoken to that previously and knew the people who ran it. And John Allsop, the guy who was running it, and Maxine Sharon were like, "Oh, you need to meet George." And so George came over to the powerhouse and was talking with us and talking about how they were using tagging and all this sort of stuff. And then Museums in the Web was in San Francisco, and then Aaron and George came to that, and Powerhouse was, I was there presenting all the work we'd done on releasing the collection, and then the Commons comes up, all that sort of stuff. So it was this sort of network, this sort of small network of people. And I guess one of the big, really important things at the Powerhouse was that I think very early on, both Tim and Kevin had realised, and I think this was really through Museums in the Web, and what's that other one, iChim or something that Archie, that David and Jennifer used to run, that through that work in the 1990s, and of course Kevin was running AMOL before from Powerhouse as well, which was sort of the museum aggregator across Australia. It turned into a thing called CAN, that was one of my group's projects later on. I think through that there was a big realisation institutionally that travel, particularly from Australia, was absolutely important, and you would probably sacrifice other things before you cut the travel budget. So, I think that distilled that really important thing of being in a far away place, but with senior staff who realised that travel was really important for projects and project success, or sort of fed this notion of meeting with peers and learning from others and being much more open, which I think then really informed the strategies that I've done since with my teams and what I've done subsequently too, that all the work has been about trying to push things out rather than just serve the needs of the institution in a very localized way. Anyway, so there's that. But yeah, lots of crazy stuff, I think, going through web redesigns and just the sort of how, we had it, probably by the time I left Powerhouse, there was a whole, 50 different projects that had their own microsites and pages and stuff. And it was just, it was symptomatic of like the way that things got funded. And, I think it was good because lots of stuff got done, but it was difficult. I think a lot of us and a lot of people I've, who worked on those teams that went off to other things and run other groups have realized is this sort of challenge of how do you institutionalize the good stuff and change the core operations. And I think that's very difficult when it's incremental and project-based. And so work like the Cooper Hewitt or the stuff now here in Melbourne at ACME has been about, has been this last decade for me is about the institutionalizing of the previous decade. So rather than taking a projects approach, can you basically rebuild the entire museum around the notion of building in technology and innovation, or not innovation, but sort of constant iteration of insight and learning, and from those technologies. And of course, that's run alongside a huge visitor and user focus. And you get to Cooper Hewitt and you end up making physical devices again. And those physical devices are a nightmare because they involve atoms as well as code. And that sort of atoms piece has opened up a lot of new interesting opportunities, making physical devices, and now here making devices that are recyclable. So what we've just launched here in Melbourne with the lens is a fully recyclable take-home device thing, which is nice. But that sort of sense of the physicality of stuff opening up new opportunities, but bringing much more complexity in. And this has come at a time when, screens have proliferated and all of that. And so, I don't know if Aaron told you the story of the pen and going to Spain when he had to go to Spain. Did Aaron talk about going to Spain and then Taiwan and the manufacturing and all of that? Okay, cool. So, the pen, when we were kicking around the idea with local projects, Jake Jake Barton was working for the museum, or local projects were working in the concept phase as a subcontractor of Dillis, Gerfidio and Renfro, who we'd appointed as the museum designers, the architects for the design. So this is just before Bill Moggridge died unexpectedly. So when I got there, Bill, they'd just kicked off this redevelopment. They hadn't appointed anyone. Dillis, Gerfidio and Renfro were selected as the architects, and Bill came to me and was like, we want to appoint a firm to do the interaction design, the interactive stuff that you've been talking about, Seb. DSR has recommended this firm, who actually would have been really good. And I was like, I'd been at a conference I'd spent a week with Jake very early on in local projects as his history when I was when I went to the Netherlands for a week to work on this thing. And I was like, oh, look, we should get a couple of other people to bid for this, because it might be, given we've gone with DSR, we want to have someone that's not going to be as bound to the architecture as their preferred consultant might be. If you have the experience, the interaction people reporting to the architect always dominates because of the structure. Local projects won that bid, I guess, and were paired with DSR, and DSR was responsible for presenting the overall concept to the museum. And so Jake rings me up the night before and says, Seb, we've got this crazy idea. I don't know if DSR is ever going to present it, so I just wanted to run you through it first. And I was like, so what is it, man? He's like, well, what if we made a pen for like visitors to get? And I was like, yeah, that's freaking great. That's really genius. Let's like make it happen. And if DSR doesn't let you present that, I am actually going to ask in that meeting tomorrow. I've heard this rumor about this thing called a pen. What is that? Tell us about it, Jake. So actually DSR, to their credit, let them present it, and everybody loved it. And, I think it was really interesting. But then, of course, it was just an image on a screen of a stylus, like one you bought off the shelf, which, of course, is nothing about actually making that. And, I think as per the museums in the web paper, like a year out from the opening of the museum, we still had no way of making the freaking thing. So Aaron and I and a bunch of others, with the director, Carolyn Bowman, she'd pulled a lot of strings and had pulled in the chief marketer, CMO of GE, who was on the board. So Beth Comstock, was like, Carolyn Bowman rings her up and goes, look, Seb and Aaron and the team want to get some time with GE's product designers because you guys do this all the time. So she's like, yeah, sure. We'll just fly everybody in and we'll do a meeting and we'll do a couple of days. We're like, fantastic, great, cool. And of course, that just generates more noise and more chaos, but it was good. And we realized at that point, holy crap, this is really, really, really hard. And it was way beyond, what Jake and local projects really knew about too. They were excited about it, but they were like, holy crap, building this thing's gonna be really hard. We'd reached out to a couple of the Kickstarter projects that were doing styluses at that point and said, can you get the unit cost down on this? And can we put a chip in it and stuff? They're like, yeah, maybe the unit cost's really high. Like, holy crap, whatever. Anyway, so then we ended up working with this strategy firm in New York that has also now folded, but was very into that sort of intersection of product and tech and network tech. And we found a firm in Spain who manufactured something that was very similar. Called the V-Wand or something like that. Anyway, it was used in healthcare to register patients from their little wristbands. We'd also looked at wristbands. Funny story about those. Again, I don't know if Aaron has told you this, but wristbands. So we were sitting around going, oh yeah, those slap bands that kids had where you slap it sticks on your wrist. Could we do that? We could put a chip in that. It would be really easy. And I'd talked about some of the ticketing systems that I'd seen at science museums and the powerhouse had experimented with in the past with those NFC wristbands that you get at festivals now. The Magic Band was also a thing, of course, too. And, so the slap bands felt cheap. And so, we're digging around that. And actually DSR, Dilla Scofidio and Renfro, Rick Scofidio had been like, yeah, we should just do that. That seems pretty good. And Jake's like, yeah, it's not really very good because it's not a pen, but yeah, okay, whatever. And then we found out, I did a bit of digging about those because I was like, why are those hard to find? And they were banned in New York schools in the late 1990s because kids were taking off the wrapping and using them as weapons to cut each other. So we found the V1. The V1 was ugly as hell, but the company seemed legit. So we reached out to them with the designs from GE and said, look, would you manufacture a new one of these for us? It doesn't need memory, just needs to do this. It doesn't need a lot of memory. It just needs to do this, and this. We'll pay you this amount of money. What do you reckon? Can you get it done in the time and the cost? And they were like, oh yeah, we can probably do that. So we did that, and then they had to work with their manufacturers in Taiwan. And so we've got this great video of the pens being made in Taiwan in 2014. It's freaking great. So there was all this sort of furious rush about trying to get these pens manufactured. And of course, this is like making 3,000 devices is not, that's not commercially viable really for anybody. I think it's actually very challenging to, that's just very hard. So anyway, the unit cost of them was like $200-ish, which actually was pretty good. And then of course, the problem becomes batteries. So, we've gone with AA batteries and all that. And there were so many meetings where we were talking about what's the battery life of those and how long are they going to last? And we managed to get the battery life down to, I think, 28 days, I think. And we had this sort of limit of like, we can't make it less than that because you've got 3,000 pens on the floor. How are staff going to replace the batteries in these less than every month? Like if it's every month, it's manageable, but imagine unscrewing with a secure cap because you have to design the pen so kids can't get the batteries out. And then there was things like, well, what if the kids unscrew the top of the thing and swallow it? And like, it was like all the overhead of Smithsonian risk assessment is intense. What if someone whacks someone with a pen? They're like heavy, and what if Sammy hits Johnny with one of these and he pokes an eye out, or like it's like, oh my god, people, this is why these things are hard, but also this is why institutions get in their own way. It's like madness. Anyway, so we're doing all this stuff, and so then the pen arrives and of course doesn't have batteries in it. So there's this great photo that's been floating around on social for a while. I'll try and dig it up, of all the curators and all the Cooper Hewitt stuff, of which there weren't many actually in the grand scheme of things. It was about the third the size of Powerhouse staff, putting batteries in these pens. It's like, oh my God, this is like effort. But it was worth it. It was totally worth it. And, it was really good for the institutional brand and all of that. But really, at the end of the day, the pen was a distraction. The pen was a fancy thing that got a lot of press and worked actually pretty well. But the real innovation there was bringing all this stuff together and giving it muscles, which I don't think it's really exercised since. I think that's one of the real unfortunate legacies of the Cooper Hewitt is director left for reasons. And also the key staff left for reasons as well. But once all that happens, the institutional memory, once you have a certain critical mass of people leave, it becomes very hard to carry on the work that's been done. And people come in and don't want to carry it on then because they don't see, they lack a curiosity for those stories. But I think it's interesting the sort of the real challenges that showed, but it also showed that a small institution in terms of staff can actually do quite radical things that radically reshape who comes to it and its brand positioning through if what was effectively well-designed novelty, but novelty that had a really serious underpinning to it and really good design behind it, you know. But yeah, everything that could have possibly gone wrong with that project did. Director dying, funder challenges, you know, all the kind of complexities of manufacturing, troubles with when you have manufactured the thing, the label's not reading because DSR's made all the physical work of the labels metal, not realizing that the NFC needs to have a field that having a metal label rail isn't going to cut it. So we had to get this shielding that sat between the label and the NFC tag on the underneath it. It was like, holy crap, you know, all this additional stuff that, again, in hindsight, you would have picked up. Like nowadays, I would, you know, that was the very first thing when I moved to Melbourne. I was like, okay, well now I know all the things with coordination, knowing technology, knowing the specifics of the tech better. We can do this much better, much faster, and we can set the project up in a way that the architecture layer, the experience layer, and all of those things are designed so that they actually complement each other rather than work against each other. And I think that's, you know, I think that's just the nature of the tech too. I think that's the other thing is that, you know, I guess one of the things I've learned is that there's no perfect way to do any of this. And if you're doing stuff in the sort of near, I don't know, I don't even know what to call it, the sort of at the edge of what's possible, then stuff's going to go wrong and you just need to build that contingency in. So it's okay. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. But I think organizations have to feel comfortable that there is no, if you're doing new, exciting stuff, there is no roadmap or plan. You have a direction you're heading, and things can and will go wrong. And it's your ability to adjust course as a result of that that's key. And I think institutions, you know, I think the procurement practices of institutions really work very hard against that. And, you know, I think a lot of the work that I was doing behind the scenes around that, and also the project here in Melbourne has been around working with lawyers, you know, and even some of the stuff at Cooper Hewitt around the digital preservation work and the open sourcing of Planetary, the work that Aaron and I acquired for the collection, amongst many other things, or some other things that we acquired, was really the sort of work with General Counsel around getting them to be confident and find solutions rather than raise all the risks. So again, one of the greatest and most useful things that Lauren de Guttenplan, who was the chief counsel for the Smithsonian, I think she still is, you know, one of the first things she said to me before I'd asked her some very difficult stuff about copyright was, Seb, don't ask me questions you don't want to know answer for. Ask me questions that I need to find a solution to help you get to yes on. And she was like, tell me what you want to do. Don't ask me whether I think you should do it. Sort of thing. And it was like, yeah, it was a really useful thing. And I've used that lesson since. Is every time we talk to, you know, legal advice here in Melbourne too, we're like, okay, we want to do this. How do we make this within the bounds of the law, rather than is it legal? And that's been very successful, you know. And I think that sort of sense of risk appetite and developing a risk appetite and being comfortable with that risk appetite, rather than you know, just a risk assessment being about mitigating all the possible risks. It's like, well, how much appetite have you got for risk? Okay, we don't have any appetite around, you know, people getting hurt, but we do have our appetite around systems being down for like 24 hours. That's okay if it helps us do better stuff. Or we do have tolerance for having less support for weird things because the weird things are what makes things interesting, or less human resource for that, or whatever, whatever it is. So that risk appetite piece has been really key. And so anyway, with Lauren, we were trying to work through this notion of acquiring Planetary, which she was like, fine, isn't that just an acquisition? And we're like, oh, well, it's a piece of software. And she's like, okay, so what are you acquiring? Okay, well, you're acquiring the software. Oh, but Seb, you want to give it away? What do you mean? You're open sourcing it. Okay, well, that should be all right. Do the people who made it own all of the bits of it? Well, not really, because it's made up of libraries that are also open sourced in part. Oh, can they declare ownership of that? Well, no, because they're open source libraries. Okay, so again, working through these sort of challenges around trying to get to, can we do it? And we did, of course, and it was interesting, and it was interesting as a model. Funnily enough, it took nearly 5 years for the emulation that I had bet would happen if we open sourced it to happen. So this piece of software called Planetary was written for the iPad for iOS, and it was in one of the early versions of iOS, and it stopped working, I think, about iOS 10. And the open sourcing of the code when it was acquired was non-functional, because we always were up to iOS 11 then, I think, or whatever it was, one version ahead. So the open source code could never be actually compiled and work. And it took I think till 2019, 2020 for it to actually be fixed. And it was by somebody who had come across the source code because a friend of theirs had heard about it, and they happened to live in Sydney. It's like, wow, that's kind of hilarious. So that people who knew us from the past, so it was someone who knew the stuff from the powerhouse, one of their friends. It was like this weird small world thing. So an Australian person had sort of rebuilt the thing that an Australian had helped the Smithsonian collect. It was like, what the hell? That's kind of weird, but whatever. So anyway, those things, again, it's sort of, again, one of the things that Aaron used to always say in the office was, you museum people are so impatient. You just have to have patience on stuff, and you got to let things have time to build interest and community and usage and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, that's a bit rambling. So that's, I guess, some of the Cooper Hewitt stuff. And now here in Melbourne, I guess, again, coming back to Australia mostly because the director pitched a really interesting rebuild, which was going to not have the problems the Cooper Hewitt had structurally. Was really exciting. And, my kids were sort of reaching middle school age, and I was like, don't really want to do that in New York. And Cooper Hewitt had become strangely difficult around my visas. So again, being a resident alien was challenging. And for some reason, the Smithsonian found it very difficult to actually renew my visas for me and stuff. So I was like, why am I paying for this? This is a better offer. I'm going to do it and leave. So I did. And, coming back here, I brought a lot of that sort of understanding of like the complexities of stuff, but into an institution that really was, didn't really do anything with its collection. And its exhibitions and programs were certainly not about its collection. And now, we've just reopened, and we have the collection right up front in a media preservation lab. We have a whole bunch of stuff going on with digital preservation now that wasn't happening previously. All new exhibitions and stuff. We've done this thing called the lens, which is really the reverse of the pen. So instead of borrowing a device that's smart, you have smart labels that you have a dumb take-home device you take home with you. You move through the galleries with, and there's all those things that we couldn't do at Cooper Hewitt. The reason we didn't put the smarts in the labels at Cooper Hewitt was because we were told there was a risk of fire if that happened. If we put electronics in the wall labels, then we would be affecting the risk of the objects, the precious things catching fire from them somehow. I don't know how that would necessarily occur, but again, risks are weird. Risk assessments are weird. But here in Melbourne, fortunately, we didn't have that problem. And again, so we've ended up with an infrastructure that is much smarter than the things visitors carry around with them, which is good and opens up all these new opportunities. You know, having a director and board who's been very excited about the possibilities of tech, and a director who's come from the festivals world. So she's been very up for risk, and she's very open about, we might do 10 things and 3 of them might be disastrous failures. That's perfectly fine. What did we learn so we don't do that again from them? Or how do we make that a better idea? And that's been across everything. Has been really, really great. And I think just, I think with the IT teams here, everything is below the waterline. Everything that you see as a visitor is almost all the work that happens to make that seem seamless is visible. And I think we've been doing, I just spent the morning actually working with all my teams, now marketing and design and, all those other operational teams too, front of house and all of that around. Folks, we know you're overworked. We've just opened the building. We launched a new brand. We're doing all this stuff. You have to make your work visible. So finding ways, taking all the stuff that, I guess I've done from Powerhouse days with the blogging and all of that, and say, you have to tell people about the work you're doing. You can't just show what got done. You have to show how it got done and what it achieved, because otherwise they don't realize how much work it actually was to get to where we've got to. So if that's making an amazing ad campaign or new trailers for the cinemas, show the process, because otherwise no one knows. And in fact, that's been one of the things for the museum's curation as well. With the whole new sort of institutional mandate, I guess, or manifesto is around, I guess I would call it visible, transparent, testable curation. So we were in an institution that historically, because it hasn't really done stuff with its collection so much, hasn't had a visible opinion. So it's put stuff on, but it's been sort of, if you looked at it from afar, it would be like programming an arts centre. So the arts centre sort of has a neutrality to it because it hosts stuff. It's just the host. But now, I guess also coming out of the sort of museums are not kind of a sort of neutral awareness and decolonializing and all the other things that museums are doing. This sort of notion of making your curatorial opinions visible and owned is super important. And then how do you allow people to contest them is absolutely critical. So again, applying that to all the stuff we're doing, we've focused a lot on process and focused a lot on surfacing that process, not only of the stuff that the people we work with do, so artists and creators and makers and stuff, and filmmakers, video game makers, TV makers, special effects, all that stuff, showing how that's done, not showing the final thing, but then showing how that was done. We've also been doing that with our own internal work. So showing how the sausage is made of the museum to the people eating the sausage has been kind of interesting. And that's sort of, that comes with unexpected challenges. I think, now, of course, with me, with PR and comms and marketing reporting into me too, I'm also aware that sometimes when the sausage is made, things go into the sausage you might not want the person eating the sausage to know about, and that can become a big PR nightmare. So again, getting a comfort level around being an institution that shows itself warts and all, and that's part of the brand, I think has been really an ongoing piece of work. That I guess something I've learned from technology projects, and I would hope my teams have too, that technology projects have sort of led the way on that. Sort of stuff is held kind of together with sticky tape and rubber bands, and we're showing that to everybody, and that's okay. I remember when, the year after I started, we hosted an exhibition, a Martin Scorsese exhibition, and there were some costumes in that. And I remember one of the curators pointing out to me on one of the tours, like, "Hey Seb, you know this costume, this dress doesn't have a back, and this suit doesn't have a back." I'm like, "Yeah, it's really interesting." Like, so the actors wearing that on camera, but because they're only ever shooting it from the front to save money, they don't make the rest of the costume on the back. And I was like, that's like museum tech, you know, like there's a lot of stuff where we only make what's necessary. Same also in video games, when they make those great AAA video games, some of those virtual worlds, there's only like shells of things, or there's only one side of a building because that's all you're ever going to see. The virtual camera's only ever going to see the one side, or it's a repeating texture or whatever. It's the space now that I do around this sort of museum of media. The process of media has allowed us to build an identity that's a bit more okay with showing that sort of the tricks of the trade, I guess, in a way that perhaps an arts museum in a traditional sense is still a little wary about. And also I think science museums too is sort of a little bit wary of showing the tricks. And it's like, well, the visitors are interested in the tricks. They want to know how you did this. It's okay. It's not going to mean they're not going to come. And, you know, I often tell the story of my interest in, I guess, YouTube magic. So sort of magic shows and how magicians have stage magicians have adapted to YouTube. And it's like all that centuries of never tell how a trick is done is thrown out the door, because YouTube means there's an opportunity to explain how tricks are done, because the watcher can slow that right down. So even sleight of hand and illusionist tricks, they can slow the frame rate right down, and you can see the card coming out of the sleeve, which you could never see at full speed. So that's sort of showing it is building a different audience, and I think that's been kind of interesting. And you know, I guess I've been interested in that sort of magic piece too, because it feels like technology for the last 20 years has been going through that same sort of period, that from the 90s to the 1920s, where magic shows were our cultural way of dealing with electricity, you know, and the arrival of electricity and the consumerization of that. It sort of feels very similar, that network tech, the magic of network tech, the magicians of that are different. But there's a lot of similarities there. So showing the magician's process, I think, is a really important literacy piece for our visitors, but also for ourselves. And, you know, network.
I was just about to say that the funny, just yesterday, I watched Christopher Nolan's The Prestige.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
I had never seen it before, but it's exactly what you're talking about, right?
That's it. Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. That period of time feels like this period of time.
That's a really great metaphor, and you've covered so many fascinating philosophical shifts as you've gone through this history of museum computing, and I probably don't have time to pull all the threads, but maybe choosing one. There's this idea that the process is more important than the product. And that's an important shift to, you know, what we learn from doing this project is more important than the final thing.
Very much.
If you lose what you learned, how do you keep that institutional knowledge? I mean, look what happened to Cooper Hewitt, right? How do we encourage people to grasp that philosophical shift in museums?
I think it's about documenting as you go and publicly doing it. I think the impact of blogging for me in 2005 or 4, whenever Fresh and kind of new started, really as the departmental blog of my team, which ended up predominantly being me blogging at Powerhouse. So that came with me when I left Powerhouse. You know, that writing in public. I think Paula Bray, who was in my teams at Powerhouse, she went on to run the DX lab at State kind of Library of New South Wales, and you can see in their work they publish not only blogs about their process, but they also publish the code about their process too. So that's been really good. I think there's a lot of ways of doing it. It's just building the time in to do it is very hard. And ACME, you know, my team's there. You know, I don't think the lab's blog has been updated since December. We've launched a new museum. Like it's really, really hard to build that time in. And indeed, I know one of my senior staff, Lucy Patterson's actually off today writing about 6 posts that will be coming out. She's like, I'll finish her museums in the web paper, painful as it is, you know, which I've then got to add all my bits to, which is the whole process stuff. Again, that sort of communication of the process as you're going is really important. I think that's been key to the practice, but different teams have really struggled with that. So here in Melbourne, I guess, trying to institutionalize that with other teams has been very challenging. So getting the exhibitions team to write about stuff, I think the last post we got was actually really, really good, which was talking about the way during COVID they have adapted to remote installing, like guiding through, like we have a big touring exhibition program. And in fact, our DreamWorks exhibition took out the top 2 most visited exhibitions in 2019 spots when it toured to 2 venues in Brazil, which was like crazy. So big touring shows, they have to do those all completely remotely because of COVID. So gear still gets sent, but now you have to take someone through how do you set it up, which is hard. So they talked about that, but it was very difficult for them to sort of abstract themselves, I think, from the blog post as promotion. And I think, you know, I think between myself and Shelley at Brooklyn at the time, there was a bunch of us who were writing furiously about what we were doing. And the act of writing the warts and all was the promotion, but we weren't seeing it as promotion. We were seeing it as being part of a community of people, a global community of peers. And I know that, you know, Shelley would write a post, we would read it and go, wow, we should try that. And I know that Shelley's team would do exactly the same. So it was this sort of really fun kind of community competition almost, but it was a process sharing. I think that has been somewhat lost. And I would also say that in some ways, finding technical staff who are good at writing is also something that people don't necessarily say, but we had a developer when I joined here in Melbourne. The developer we had then was a freaking amazing writer. His posts were incredible and were really beautifully written and really interesting, but he'd never been asked to write them before, you know, and he was actually turned out to be a really amazing writer, and he could go off and write a book. It'd be great, you know. So I think sometimes the sort of how we communicate, and I think I've sometimes worried that we do this now by video and stuff, and that's terrible for search and other things. And, you know, again, no one wants to write documentation. But documentation is important, but documentation, as Aaron says to me, it's not storytelling. You need documentation and storytelling. And the stories are really super important. That's what excites me about this project. It's the stories that matter, because the stories are the reason why you might do the documentation. I mean, there's a certain sense of technical literacy too that people need to have. And I think that's the other challenge for the field, is that I think as museum tech has necessarily expanded to social media and content creation, there is a little bit of a risk that the technical skills are lost or not valued. And there are technical skills and there are skills. I mean, I was talking to one of my, one of the firms we have working on web development with us. We do a lot in-house as well. And, you know, they were really stuck on a performance issue, and they got escalated to me for some reason. They're like, Seb, this is weird, what's happening? And I'm like, okay, so if I dig back into my sys administration past and I go back 20 years, have you tried this? And they're like, it's not going to work, man. That's totally not going to work. They do it, CPU load drops 50%. It's like, it worked. It was better than their kind of solution. I'm like, dude, I'm out of the game. I don't do that shit anymore. But really, some basic technical knowledge about how things might work, it's kind of important, you know. I'm not dissing them at all. It shouldn't be like that. But it's like, honestly, even as people go up in the organizational, you know, I think we need technicians. We need people with technical skill, and the people who manage them also need some technical knowledge, some contextual awareness, at least. Having, you know, someone who's been great at content or education or social media or whatever, or video making or whatever, coming and managing a team that is responsible for technical stuff with no technical background, I think is a risk.
Yeah. You lived through this, and it's the same time period that I've lived through, right? And it's the same shift from, well, IT are those people who are plugging in computers in the back room, right? To IT is doing all of this online content creation and creating new experiences. And then we're like, well, wait a minute, we still need some of that tech stuff that's back there.
At the same time that IT's become consumerized. So the other thing that I've been working with my IT team for the last 5 years, hard IT team, like the back of house enterprise systems team, is guys, you need to learn communication skills. You need to tell people what you're doing, and you need to be user focused. And they have found that really hard. So it's not technical people sometimes suck massively at, they get in their own way because they're like, oh, but if we tell the users this, they'll go and break it. It's like, if you don't, they will route around it and you'll be supporting 50 things you hate, So, and I think everybody has the story of, why is it much easier for me to collaborate on Google Docs than it is for me to collaborate in Word? What the hell? So I'm going to use Google Docs. Oh, but we're supposed to use Word for security. It's like, yeah, but Google Docs is better because it works, blah, 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 all that stuff. So IT has got, IT's been squeezed in this. Absolutely. And, I think marketing teams, my marketing team does all the social media and stuff. And, I'm trying to find a product owner for like Google Analytics, because I'm like, guys, I used to teach people this, but I'm not going to be the freaking person I shouldn't even be looking at this. Somebody needs to do this. I think you've all had this training now. Who is going to make the technical changes to it? Oh, so it's ridiculous. Last week, I am in there doing stuff which, honestly, I'm freaking, I'm that's totally not my role, and it would be like the director of the organization moving an object on a wall in a case. Right. It's like, you don't do that. That's not I can, but I shouldn't have to. And I guess it's that sort of, the complexity of technical literacies that are required are broad, and institutions need to spread that literacy across them. But you've got to find ways to, I don't know, man, it's really tough. I think it's technology and IT are changing, but also so is everything else. And I think that's where, we've just been we are in a period of massive change, and it's just got more challenging with COVID across everything. It's across our lives as well. We all have experiences of trying to help our parents figure out how to, my mum is now 80, 80s. She's still got a university email address, as an emeritus professor and stuff, and they change her password once every 6 months, and it's a nightmare. And it's really difficult. They can't help her change it. I'm in another state, so it's very difficult I have to talk to her over face kind of time and Zoom to help her figure out where to change it. And, none of this is, anyway, all that stuff. I think that complexity, I think the sort of flight or fight response is, we'll outsource all of that. But if you outsource it, you need somebody really technically knowledgeable so you don't get ripped off and you make good choices. If you outsource it, it brings a whole other set of difficulties. So I talk about the institutional muscles needing to be built around particular things strategically chosen that you want to build those muscles in, but you've got to build muscles in things you're going to exercise with. There's no point going to work out at the gym if you're not going to keep working out at the gym. I hate the gym, by the way, so I'd never do that. So, I would go for a walk. So, I will continue to walk. But, it's like, build the muscles you're actually going to use. Sometimes you need help to figure out what they might be.
And as you say, you need to keep using the muscles as well. And if we think about this as the institutional memory, I worry that we've lost a decade's worth of institutional memory here.
Oh, we have. I mean, I think sector-wide, we're back in where we were at the end of the 90s, and lots of people have left, and a lot of projects, you know, in talking to Paula and also talking to the people like Ben, who used to be at New York Public Library Labs, people like that, you know, that Ben Birschbaum.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of their work has been really, really influential and important, but it never got folded into general operations.
Right.
And it didn't get folded into general operations where it would have got supported and done all that, because general operations hated the idea of having to change the legacy stuff. And so there's this big friction around how do you do experimental projects that then change the core. And I think that's where the Cooper Hewitt work was really good. We did the work, it changed the core and reasons, problems, too many people left. Acme, we did the work, we changed the core, we have different things. We really focused on the key to the experimental stuff is to always find ways to build them into what the core business, core operations are. And if you can't do that, make it the new core business. So that's where the APIs, I mean, all the museum APIs, great, but you have to use them internally. You don't just make them for outside people. Force everybody internally to use those APIs, it's fine.
Yeah.
Build everything you do in the future with them.
By the way, I should let you know that I still use the Cooper Hewitt Collections API example when I talk about APIs in my museum informatics class.
Oh man, I hope it's still working.
It's still
I think they're going to turn it off soon because they don't know what to do with it.
Well, it was up last year.
That's good. Well, yeah, I am worried. I mean, Aaron and I are like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Like, why would you build another one? Like, it's there. Like, learn the basics, because whatever you get, it's not going to be better.
Well, and again, we're back, I think, also to philosophical shifts. Talk about the 1990s. I mean, there are some things that I think we made progress in. Open access. I think we've come a long way in accepting that. And I would also argue that we've come some way in being acceptable. How am I going to phrase this? Let me try this. So in the 1990s, I remember talking to a lot of museum registrars who would say, oh, we're really reluctant to put in any of our information online because we know it's not accurate. It's not 100% perfect.
So we've changed that. We've
changed that.
Yeah, that's changed.
Right. So I'm seeing positive philosophical shifts in the people who are working in museums. But at the same time, I worry about the knowledge we've lost, and we've invested. We put so much money in so many projects. With my museum informatics students, I tend to use Second Life as an example of look at all the money museums put into Second Life, knowing full well that that was never going to be a long-term solution. But what you're building is an understanding of how to work with technology like that. You're investing in your staff.
That's right. You're
not investing in some virtual island somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that that investment, I guess it's the problem of people seeing investment in terms of product outcomes rather than process outcomes. So you would invest in Second Life not for creating a world in Second Life, but from what you learn from the process of doing that, and that's why you invest in it. But I don't think, if I'm being harsh, I don't think many people in museums are in an environment where they are able to, or feel they are able to, talk about it like that. And certainly, you know, when I was talking to Bloomberg for the Cooper Hewitt and subsequently, they're very aware of the huge amounts of money that they've funded into things. And I often say that to them. I'm like, this is about process change. It's not about making products. And they're like, yes, exactly. Okay, so why does everybody who gets your money think they have to acquit it against a series of products that have been made? And like, we try to tell them they don't have to do that. But I think the people who are doing the acquittals, the staff who are running them, you know, often those staff have also come out of backgrounds where they've been making those products, and education has been to do this particular thing, and then you report how many people came and sign it off, and you get, you know, money's done. It's not like that with this. It shouldn't be like that with that, but not enough people think about it or are able to communicate that internally. build alliances and coalitions around that well. And again, that's just, I think it's also, I think a lot of people being asked to do lots of jobs at once, and that doesn't give them that sort of flex time. And I would say it's a deterioration of the networks of people that were so good in the 2000s. I think we had some really great, when I would go to MW, when I go to other things, they would be transformational moments because of the networks of people were really good. You go chat to people, you go see their session, you catch up with them. They were good mixes of people. I just don't think it's like that now. I really don't. I think it's a different mix of people. I just came off Museum Next. It was fantastic. 9,000
I heard it was
people.
amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. Totally amazing.
Good.
But very different.
Yeah.
Very different type of conversation. A lot of conversation about content, nothing about nothing about the pipes, processes, structures, products that content runs on.
Right.
Nothing. Because it's too complicated and opaque for people, and all the old people like us are like a little bit jaded. But also, I have to say, I'm intolerant. People know that I just have no time to talk to someone who's like, I do. I talk to students and I spend a lot of time actually. I remember saying, I never speak to students. Seb, that's so annoying. I'm like, no, you have to speak to students. You've got to do it because they're like the future. And she's like, yeah, but, and I'm like, and she didn't have time. I get it. But, I think it's that thing of like, it's just the sort of contextual knowledge that people get over time. And if you don't have that contextual knowledge around technology and media and all the other things that we care about, you ask dumb questions, and who you're asking them to has to be tolerant of the dumb questions. And, I think in universities training people in this, I don't see enough people coming out with those dumb questions answered. Yeah. So when they come to me, they're asking really good things. Well, they ask a few dumb things, but it's not like an hour of dumb things,
Yeah, well, I mean, part of the problem that we're seeing in IT programs now is that we've got a whole generation coming in now for whom they've never worked behind the scenes in a computer, right?
That's right.
They might not even know where their files are stored.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm actually giving a talk with Atlassian's engineer design and research team. Atlassian, who do Jira, Slack, Confluence, or Confluence, Jira, Trello, all that, not Slack, but Atlassian, and I was talking to their head of research, and she was saying, my talks about design in the context, and she was like, yeah, my designers here, they all think design and UX is about moving buttons around on an interface. Not like the context of the user sitting in a room using their thing where the buttons are, or any of that. Just like they're just not. So what they're doing is interface design, not interaction design.
Well, I was going to say, there's my introduction. There's one of my introductory lectures for my class. Let's talk about the difference between interface design and the user experience, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So like this sort of, we've got sort of hyper detailed, but hyper detailed on the wrong things.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's, exactly. I think culturally that's a big change. And I think technology, again, going back to the prestige, technology's lost its magic. There is no magic in mobile devices now. There should be, but there isn't. They are magic, but they're like electricity. I mean, like, what the fuck? It works. Cool. Let's do stuff. But for a while, it was magic, and those magic shows were amazing.